Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias Reinwarth. I'm an analyst and advisor at KuppingerCole Analysts. In each edition, I will have one guest joining me, a fellow analyst or another interesting partner, and we will have a 15 minutes or so chat around interesting topics. My guest today again is Graham Williamson. He's an analyst for KuppingerCole in Brisbane. We had an earlier episode together when we looked at IAM projects and the issues around them being too big or tending to fail. And we did have a look at it from a solution architecture point of view. Today, we will talk about IAM projects from a different angle. So we will look at the project management side for an IAM project. But first of all, welcome, Graham.
Thanks, Matthias. Good to be with you today.
Great to have you back again here and to learn from your insight and your experiences when it comes to managing large-scale projects in the area of IAM. So we talked about that earlier. Martin Kuppinger did that in a video we published on the KuppingerCole website. IAM projects are notorious for failing. They tend to fail. And we've looked at it from the architecture point of view, what to think of when it comes to IAM projects, whom to involve. But I think this whom to involve is also an interesting aspect when it comes to project management. What are your recommendations when it comes to managing large-scale IAM projects?
Right. I am a firm believer in the importance of project management. So when we say, look, an IAM project is too big, what we're basically saying is that it is touching so many parts of the identity fabric within the organization that we don't understand each of those touch points. And so what we need to do is take a project management approach to allow us to understand what projects are going to be impacted. And that will allow us then to take a management process of actually making all of the pieces come together. So what we're basically talking here is engaging a project manager. Now, when I say project manager, I've got to say a lot of companies don't have a good view of what a project manager is. They, in some cases, consider them to be, they're the person that reserves meeting rooms. They're the person that does the minutes of the meeting. That's not a project manager. A project manager is somebody who takes control of the project. And, quite frankly, project management, in my opinion, is the best return on investment you're ever going to get in an organization. Okay, so for that little bit of money that you spend on administering your project, the benefits are enormous. Can I tell you a very quick story? It happened back in 2005. The National Australia Bank in Australia had a rogue trader that cost them $262 million. It was all over the papers, front page. It was on all of the newscasts about this rogue trader that had cost the bank so much money. That same year, National Australia Bank wrote off $400 million of bad projects. And it was 3 column inches on page 7. People just didn't pay attention to it. So this is what, when it comes to IAM projects, if we can manage them like a project and apply project management principles, our chance of succeeding are far greater. I remember one project I was involved in where after we had applied these project management principles, management decided that this project was not going ahead. They didn't want to put the requisite money into making that project work. So they decided to stop the project at the end of the planning phase. That's a good outcome. Project management saved that company a lot of money because if they'd gone ahead and realized incremental costs as they went along, that could have been disastrous for the company. So I just want to say one more thing as part of this importance of project management. The company must decide. So one of the first decisions that needs to be made is, are we going to take a classic project management approach, or are we going to take an agile project management approach? And either is right. Classic is typically the safest because you are taking an approach whereby you'll take the whole project, you'll do a Gantt chart that's going to cover all of the activities, and then you will work through, in what's sometimes called a waterfall process, each of the various stages of that project. In an agile project, what you'll do is you'll take individual components of the work that needs to be done within an environment where we are looking at the whole project, but you'll take each individual piece of it and you'll manage that piece properly. And one of the advantages there is you can quickly pivot if something's gone wrong and fix it up, rather than in a classic approach where you've got to now go back, redo the schedule, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the main decisions. And that decision will be based primarily on what are the normal processes within the organization and what are the capabilities of their staff. But regardless of which option you take, you've got to choose to do project management. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and many questions from my side. First of all, you've mentioned agile versus standard or traditional project management. From your experiences, is it really shifting towards agile when it comes to real large-scale projects? Because there needs to be someone who has the bigger picture, even if they're working agile and in small chunks. This is a challenging task.
It is. Is it a challenging task? The answer to your question is yes. Agile is very appropriate. It's actually quite appropriate for an IAM project because you're typically dealing with activities that are going to be done as a piece. So, for instance, one piece I might have to do is do a connector to the HR system. Well, in Agile, that becomes there's various words for how you manage that, but it becomes a piece of work that I can put up on the project wall. I can identify the issues that need to be addressed, and I can monitor as that proceeds. And typically, if we can take our pieces of work to be a couple of weeks' work, that's ideal. And so Agile can be very efficient in doing that, but you can't start the Agile project management until you've done some preparatory work. So there's certain things that we need to do. First is make sure that we've identified all of the stakeholders. Okay, so we need to do a stakeholder analysis so that we actually know who to include, called a project stand-up. So in an agile environment, you will have a project wall, which will be a big chipboard or whiteboard or something where we're going to put the individual components of our project up there. The pieces that haven't yet started, the pieces that we're currently working on, and the pieces that we're completed. A stakeholder should be able to come, look at that wall, and in 30 seconds, understand where the project is. So you need to have identified those project stakeholders. So a stakeholder, for instance, might be the owner of the HR system. The owner of the HR system should rightly be involved in any stand-up, and the stand-up is happening every 3 or 4 days, maybe out to a week. I don't like to go out to a week. I like to keep it a bit shorter than that, where the stakeholders come together and in a very stand-up meeting, like very short meeting, make sure that they, number one, understand the current progress, and number two, understand any issues, and then they can go away and work on any issues that need to be resolved. So it's a way of identifying to management what issues there are and allow the management to resolve them. So the whole idea of project management is to expose the project and the project activities. The next piece of project planning that needs to be done is a communications plan. You need to upfront decide who needs to be advised about the project and when and what. So for instance, a steering committee member will need to get the minutes of the steering committees that happen. And you need to also put there, well, how is it going to be sent? Is it going to be emailed? Is it going to be put on the website? Like I like for any project I run to have a URL that I can point people to if they want information about the project. So if I'm going to put my steering committee minutes up on there, I've got to identify that in a communications plan. Some cases, a stakeholder won't be able to get to that URL. They might be in another building that doesn't have access to it. So then I've got to email it to them. Or if you've written it down in a communications plan, you'll know what you've got to do. If you fail to do that, you might not know till halfway through the project that somebody in the committee that's managing this, the steering committee, is not getting the documentation. You need to nip in the bud all sorts of problems that might happen that way, and the project management will help you do that. Quality plan is another one. You can do tasks very quickly if you're not concerned about the quality of the task. So if you've got a quality management plan, you will say, well, for every deliverable, this is how we're going to make sure it gets accepted as being adequate. So you need a quality plan. And then you need a schedule. Okay. Typically, you'll use a Gantt chart. Gantt chart are de rigueur now because it shows you the items that are being done, and then it has the schedule beside that. So you'll see the timeline of each of those activities. So Gantt charts are quite popular there. So you need to have these artifacts in order to make sure that the project's being properly managed. Does that make sense, Matthias?
Absolutely, and maybe this really important role of the project manager, as you just described it, and who takes care of these artifacts of these processes that you just described and the results. I've seen it both. I've seen it being somebody who is just a project manager with no knowledge or background of being an identity professional, and I've seen it with people who are identity professionals so that they can contribute their expertise to the ongoing project and really understand much more about what's going on behind that. I think both has its pros and cons. What would you recommend, or what do you see in practice?
Yeah, a good point. Yes, in often cases, an organization will engage a professional project manager who doesn't have any knowledge of identity and access management. Now, that can work, provided that project manager relies on the people in his team or her team to help and to identify what needs to be done. Okay, I often get the question, issues register. How do we do an issues register? How do I identify issues? And I said, well, what you need to do is get the right people in a room. You stand in front of the whiteboard and say, what can go wrong? If you do that, they'll tell you. If you don't do that, they won't. So a project manager who understands how to manage a project will make sure that he or she relies on their team to ensure that that project's a success. And having that communication with the team members, giving them the ability to communicate with each other is pretty essential. There's one other essential point I'd like to make, and that's the steering committee. Please never run a project without a steering committee. The steering committee is the group that will be responsible for monitoring the progress of the project, and more importantly, resolving any issues that arise. So as a project manager, you need to monthly or every 6 weeks, depending upon what frequency it is, go in front of the steering committee and say, this is where we're at, folks, and these are the problems I've got that you need to resolve. A lot of people think a project manager is somebody that walks on water. Well, that's not the case. A project manager is a person who identifies to the company what the project's doing and gives them the visibility of how to properly manage that. So if you don't have a steering committee in place, the chance of a project getting off the rails is much greater. And it gives a regimen, if you like, to make sure that that happens. And those people have to be at the right level. I remember a project I did in Singapore, a government project, where the people managing the project didn't want upper management within the agency to be aware of what was happening. They would not let me as a project manager go to the people that could make the decisions with my requests. They said, no, we'll do that for you. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen very well. And so that was a very difficult way to manage that particular project. You need the right people at the right level to be able to deal with your issues. But please make sure that you construct that steering committee and have the regular steering committee meetings that monitor the progress. Because if you don't have that management won't happen. You'll leave out that piece of it. So yeah, those are the main issues that I wanted to just highlight.
Right. So I think when we sum it up also from the earlier episode that we had together, the main thing that we are really looking at here is transparency and visibility, so that communication is as open as possible and the overall systems are fully understood and well communicated. So it's the systems plus the processes that are going on, that everybody who is involved and everybody who should be involved actually is, and is always in the situation to get the information about the project over time that he requires and needs to make further decisions. So it's really about transparency. Am I right?
Absolutely. I love that word. So project management will make sure that all of the activity is exposed and managed so that issues can be addressed and resolved. And in that way, management will be engaged in the success of the project.
Right. Maybe one final short thought before we close down. Things have changed when it comes to meetings, when it comes to communication just right now. And also Australia is not that small, so that it's not necessarily always the case that you can get all people into one room at a time. Does that, what you described just right now, when it comes to the communications plan, to the stand-ups, to the project wall, to work in a virtual environment, in a collaborative form like Teams, like, I don't know, WebEx or whatever you have, and SharePoint, is this something that can work as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's pretty essential in many cases, because if you've got a distributed organization where you're dealing with branches in different cities, that's how you have to do it. And all the tools are there now. So, for instance, if you're doing an Agile project, and you can use the Trello application to manage that, to put up your project wall, excellent solutions. So all of this can work in a virtual environment.
Okay, perfect. So then that's it for today. You actually did a great summary already, so I'm skipping that step here. Thank you very much, Graham, for again being my guest today here in that podcast. And we will surely have further editions of this podcast together, and also benefit from your vast experience as a project identity professional in your area. Thank you very much for your time, Graham.
Super. Thanks, Matthias.
Thank you. Bye-bye.